if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to weigh in with, the email address is Ask Congressman King. That's all one word, askcongressmanking@gmail.com. And we've advertised some of this and asked people to send questions in. This is the online video equivalent of a town hall meeting, whether we're sitting in a town hall and actually taking questions and comments from people in the crowd, or as many of you have received a telephone call from me, and we call them teletown halls, where I get on the telephone and dial a group of houses and homes in the district usually, and we hear from you about the things that are on your mind. It gives me a chance to hear from you, and it gives you a chance to hear from me. This is the online version, and this is live, and so if you have a question or a comment, just email it into askcongressmanking@gmail.com. Askcongressmanking@gmail.com, and I'll take your questions just as they come. These are questions that haven't been edited. They haven't been screened. It's just the email that came off from people that have sent in questions prior to this broadcast. And I'm sorry we were about 11 minutes late getting started here. We had some technical difficulties in my office. But I'm sitting in my office in Washington, D.C., and it's evening here, of course, in Washington, and we've been through a bit of a day's work. But I'll take up the first question and invite anyone to send an email in with a question on it to the address askcongressmanking@gmail.com. And again, this is just live interactive. I've not seen these questions before. I'm going to read them to you just the way they come. And this one is from Marilyn, and she says this: with billions being added to our country's debt every day, is there even an answer to get out of debt? Why do we keep dumping funds in countries all over the world when we have no money and have to borrow to meet our own debts? Well, Marilyn, that's a good point, and you're right. Is there any hope for us to get out of debt? Is there an answer to get out of debt is the specific part of your question. And the answer to that is it's very tough. I've been pushing to get to a balanced budget since I arrived here in Congress. I remember when I arrived here in 2003, I went to the chairman of the Budget Committee and said, where's our balanced budget? And he looked at me and said, we can't balance the budget. Don't you know we've been attacked on September 11th? We've had to create TSA. We have all the costs of war going into Afghanistan. We're there now, and we're poised to go into Iraq. We can't balance the budget. And I insisted that we could. I set about trying to write a balanced budget with my new and relatively green staff that was here at the time. We didn't quite get that done. It's an awfully big national budget to try to do in-house in your first couple of months here. But I've worked towards that balanced budget ever since. We have now voted on a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. That happened last year. That amendment has to pass by a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate and then be sent to the states, where 38 states have to ratify the amendment. It's a very high bar to achieve. But I've come to the conclusion that we can't get a balanced budget without the discipline of a balanced budget amendment. There are a lot of reasons why this country is spending more than it's taking in, but we're borrowing about 40 cents out of every dollar that we spend. And some of that comes from China, some from Saudi Arabia. About half of that borrowed money comes from the American people who are investing in U.S. Treasury bills and bonds. But I don't think we can get it balanced without a balanced budget amendment. The American people are going to have to demand that this Congress balance the budget. And I've called upon the next president of the United States, which we know that President Obama doesn't support a balanced budget amendment. In fact, he's been offering us budget deficits each year. For this fiscal year, he presented a budget to the Congress that created a $1.33 trillion deficit for the year. And so with that, I'll say that determination to spend money at that pace and the resistance to balancing the budget, I'm calling upon the next president of the United States to receive a mandate from the American people to push for a balanced budget amendment to be passed out of the United States Congress, out of the House and out of the Senate, and sent to the states for ratification. A president doesn't get to vote on an amendment, but he does have the bully pulpit, and he does have the leverage that will be helpful in getting this passed out of the Congress. Without a balanced budget amendment, Marilyn, I don't know what saves us from this fiscal cliff that we're headed towards. I don't think we have 10 years. I don't think we have 5 years. I think that's something probably a little bit less than 5 years. We need to get this resolved. So I appreciate your question. If you have a question or a comment, just send an email to askcongressmanking@gmail.com. That's where these emails came from. And they're just print them off as they come in and hand them to me, and I'll read them to you for the first time. This is as if someone were standing up in a town hall meeting and asking a question. And this one is a little bit long, and it's from William, and he writes this. I feel that the feds have committed 2 breaches of contract. Establishing a tree planting, 65,000 trees, is very costly and required a huge amount of time and effort. Now I am faced with, number 1, the huge costs of tree removal and restoration of the land to crop production, and 2, loss of a unique and valuable resource on the Iowa landscape, along with loss of powerful carbon collector mechanism, and 3, have serious fixed financial loss in a 15-year contract, which will run during one of the greatest inflationary periods in the history of our country. Is there anything that you can do to, 1, restore the riparian acres to 74 as originally contracted, 2, increase the contract price from $262 per acre to the halfway point to $356 an acre to the going rental rate of $450 an acre? Now, this is getting a little technical, I think, for a lot of the viewers here. Then he follows through and he says, I am a consummate conservationist and would love to maintain this important resource for generations to come, but am faced with financial realities as well. Thank you, Steve. I look forward to chatting with you this evening. And then the gentleman gives his name and his contact information. And I would say this to William, that this is a bit of a technical question. It's something we'd have to have some dialogue on, and it's probably not prudent of me to try to answer it without having that kind of open dialogue. You know, I remember I've planted quite a lot of trees myself, and you know, as a young Cub Scout, for example, that was the first time I remember going out and planting dry-rooted trees as I sat on the planter and plugged the trees in the planter as we went through. Planted, I suppose, thousands of trees over the years, and taken a few out too, William, and I appreciate you being for the riparian beauty, and I hope there's a way we can help solve your situation, but I just don't know enough about this in detail to try to give an answer here over this live stream, and I'm sorry about that, William. This is Congressman Steve King. We're in my office here in Washington, D.C., 1131 Longworth, and this is mostly after everybody's working day, but hopefully you're still up in Iowa and across the country. This is the live stream. It's like a town hall meeting or like a plain town hall meeting where people have questions and comments. They send them in by email. If you have one, just email it to askcongressmanking@gmail.com. Ask Congressman King is all one word, then @gmail.com, and we'll print those out and pass them over to me, and I'll read them to you just as I get them. This is unscreened as it goes. And this live stream, experimental for us. This is only the second time we've done this. So I have a question from James in Portsmouth, and his question is this. He said, I'd like to know how you're keeping an eye on wasteful spending at the national level. There's nothing more maddening than to regular people like myself when wasteful budget items are passed and then the criticism is brushed off with statements like, quote, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the overall federal budget, close quote. If you're looking for examples, look no further than the GSA. Whew. Boy, I guess so, James. GSA has been in the news for their very, very expensive and lavish parties, and now we see that there are issues that have been brought forward about the GSA, about big chunks of real estate that are worth billions of dollars that are sitting there stagnant that are not being managed. Those are some of the things we don't see show up that are wasteful spending. And there's nothing more maddening than to watch that wasteful spending and then see it brushed off. Well, one of the things that I have tried to do here in this Congress that I hopefully will be able to accomplish, well, not likely in this Congress, but in a future Congress, is to actually give Congress a line item veto. You know, we had a big debate about giving the president a line item veto several presidents ago. I think it was during the Clinton administration. They did pass a line item veto, sent it to the president, and it was challenged in court, and the Supreme Court found that the line item veto for a president was unconstitutional. Since that time, people like Paul Ryan have tried to write legislation that would get around the constitutional question and still give the president a line item veto. But what I've done is I've written legislation that gives Congress a line item veto. Now, for example, what happens is that, say, the House of Representatives will start a spending bill, and they'll pass it out of the House with what used to be earmarks in it, and now we have banned earmarks, but it would go then to the Senate, where the Senate would add their earmarks, and then they would send it to conference, where their conference committee then would sort out the differences and decide which package would come before the House and the Senate for a final passage. Well, you only had a chance to vote up or down on all the Senate language when it came back as a conference here from the House. And that meant that you didn't get a chance to approve or disapprove of the line items that were added into it after it left. And you might not have had an opportunity to amend any of them out. So the legislation that I have drafted is legislation that gives Congress a line item veto. And in that window, from the time the President signs an appropriations bill, but before those funds are obligated, say to wages or contract or wherever they might be spent, it gives any member of Congress an opportunity to bring a bill up on the floor that would be, we call it a rescissions bill. In other words, it claws back the money after it's left the President's desk, but before it's obligated to the projects. And every single line item that we have would be then up for an individual vote if necessary, and each member of Congress would be accountable for everything that went the other side of the President's desk. Now, it gets a little long and complicated to detail how that all works, but we've worked on this language for some years now, and we're poised to put this language forward, and hopefully we'll be able to put it into law. That would hold every member of Congress accountable, and that would be something that would make a big difference on this government waste that we have. Meanwhile, we need people working in government that help us as watchdogs too, not people who are empowered by spending taxpayers' money. So, James, those are the things that trouble me as well. And this is a live stream telecast, you might say, a live stream internet telecast. If you have a question or a comment, you can email it to us at askcongressmanking@gmail.com. It's just an email address, askcongressmanking, that's all one word, @gmail.com. And we'll print those questions out, and I'll take them up as they come. And these are questions that they're unscreened. It's the first time I've seen them, just handed to me. And this is a question from Harvey in Cherokee, who says this: would like to listen to some of the question, but I'm sure I know where he stands on things. Same as me, and he's got my vote for sure. Okay, Harvey, thank you. I'm just going to agree with that, and certainly there's is this, that it's a privilege to serve Iowans in the United States Congress, and there's anytime you do something, you'll get praise and you'll get criticism for it, but we have to stand up for what's right. We have to stand up for principle, and Harvey, I'm sure you appreciate that, and as I do as well. Now, the next question I have is from Ellen, and Ellen says, my name is Ellen, and I'm not reading your last name here, Ellen, just on purpose, but Ellen's from Virginia. She said, I'd like to ask you, how can you equate dog fighting and human fights as one and the same? Humans choose to fight in a ring. Dogs have no choice. Humans do not fight till one dies or is nearly dead. Dogs do. Humans do not incapacitate another human so they can use them to train with. Dog fighters do. Humans are not killed or tortured to death if they lose the fight. Dogs are. Ellen, and to everybody out there, there has been a real effort off the leftist blog sites in America to distort what I said the last time. I've been a happy and proud dog owner for almost all my life. We've raised Labrador Retrievers, pointing Labrador Retrievers, and I've asked them to point to post 3 of those the family dogs up on the Facebook page tonight, so you can see what goes on in our house. We love our animals, and we love our kids and our family too. And the situation that was the discussion was at the base of it is this. And I would say for anybody out there that's an admirer of HSUS, the Humane Society of the United States, and Wayne Pacelli, the president of the same, he has sat in my office. He knows very clearly where I stand. But what he understands in here doesn't get translated always to what he says out in public. There has been a real effort to distort this out across the websites. And what I've said is that we need to respect humans as more than we do animals. Whenever we start elevating animals up to above that of humans, we've crossed a moral line. For example, if there's a sexual predator out there who has impregnated a young girl, say a 13-year-old girl, and it happens in America more times than you and I'd like to think, that sexual predator could pick that girl up off the playground at the middle school and haul her across the state line and force her to get an abortion to eradicate the evidence of his crime and bring her back and drop her off at the swing set, and that's not against the law in the United States of America. I have told Wayne Pacelli and the people who believe that we should focus all of our efforts on anything that they can bring that limits activity around animals, that we need to respect and revere human life first, animal life second. That is my stand. It is a moral stand. And it's certainly not a stand in favor of animal fighting, and there is no record that would say that either. Now, I have broken up some dog fights being around the dogs that we have, and I've got a few little marks on me that come from that. But they do jump in, and they do get into a tussle with each other once in a while, and you have to jump in there and break it up. So no, I haven't started any dog fights. I've ended a number of them that just happened spontaneously. But we love our dogs. They're great bird dogs. They're all pointing labs, and I don't know that I'd go to the field if I didn't have a dog to take with me. So we love them. The grandkids love them. And I just tell you a little narrative about our little granddaughter Reagan. And this little girl's name is Reagan Ann King. She's now about just a little over 18 months old, and she stands. Their dog is Coach, and he is a yellow pointing lab, and he's a big guy. And so Coach got a ball, a small one of Reagan's balls, in his mouth and clear back down in his mouth. And Reagan saw him pick up her ball. She walked over and looked Coach. She had to look up at Coach to look him in the eye. Knew Coach had her ball in his mouth. She just tapped him on the nose, and Coach opened his mouth a little bit, and she reached her arm clear down to the elbow, got the ball, and pulled it out. Not a bit afraid of that dog. She loves him too, but it was a neat little thing to see from my little granddaughter. So, Ellen, there's a lot of misinformation out there on the web. People have a political agenda, and there are some of them that wake up every morning looking to see what they can be indignant about, and I call them professional hyperventilators, and I hope you know the difference. I think you do. So thanks for your question. This is Congressman Steve King. We're here in my office in Washington, D.C. in this live stream town hall meeting. If you have a question or a comment, just send us an email at askcongressmanking@gmail.com. That's all one word, askcongressmanking, and then @gmail.com. And we'll pass these questions across to me, and I'll try to get as many of them answered. And I'll just, again, taking them as they come. This is like being in a town hall meeting. You never know what's going to happen. This next question is from Greg. And Greg asks this question. In light of the recent tragedies committed with firearms, I foresee increased rhetoric from the anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment individuals. Do you feel the current rules and regulations on the books are sufficient, or are other measures needed? Greg, I remember where I was when Gabby Giffords was shot. I was sitting in the studio ready to go on Fox News, and with the earpiece in that you hear from the studio, and I heard them cut in with that breaking news story, and in less than a minute they cut to me for a reaction. It really hits you hard when somebody you work with, it's a co-worker, that's a friend, and I've not had this happen to a family member, but as a friend, it hits hard. But you have to stop and think, what is the Second Amendment? What is it about? And that area where that gruesome shooting took place in Aurora, Colorado, in the theater, was a gun-free zone. Now, the perpetrator didn't respect that ordinance, that it being a gun-free zone, but it's possible that off-duty police officers did respect that ordinance and leave their firearm that they would normally carry concealed on them when they're off-duty at home or in their vehicle. In fact, I had some information that there was an off-duty police officer in one of the theaters who didn't realize that he was taking his daughter into a gun-free zone, and he did what many of the officers are required to do. He carried his gun in a concealed form on him into the theater, but he wasn't in the same theater as where the murders took place. And if he had been, one can only speculate, but it might have ended this before so many people were killed. It isn't always bad to have a gun in a place, but the criminals do not respect the laws. And so here in this country, the Second Amendment is about this. The right to keep and bear arms is not really about self-defense, as much as we'd like to say it is. It's not about target shooting. It's not about hunting. Those three things are essentially residual benefits, extra benefits from the Second Amendment. But the Second Amendment that gives us a right to keep and bear arms is so that we are an armed populace and we can defend ourselves from tyranny. The Founding Fathers understood that as long as we had guns, we could protect our freedom, protect our liberty, and protect ourselves from tyranny. That is a very, very high value, and there is too much gun violence in this country. No matter what kind of gun violence we'd have, down to a single incident would be too much. We'd always agree with that. But there's American freedom and American liberty that goes with this, and there's a responsibility that goes along with this liberty, and that's to have gun safety, treat them responsibly, and understand how they fit within the broader picture. So I don't know that we need any more rules and regulations on the books. We do punish those people that use guns, and we should punish them severely to the fullest extent of the law. And there are a good number of laws on the books that would reflect that, Greg. So thanks for your comment or your question. And anyone that has a question or a comment, just email it to askcongressmanking@gmail.com, and we'll read your question in. And I'm taking them as they come. This is completely as if we were in a town hall meeting and somebody waved their hand and stood up and asked a question. The one that has done so virtually is Tim, who asked this question. Repeal Obamacare. Okay, what is your alternative that will pass both houses? In 5 years, health care will be unaffordable. Tim, health care is unaffordable for a lot of people today. The premiums have gone up dramatically since Obamacare passed. I have been very clear that, and I've worked for the last 2.5 years to repeal Obamacare. I worked for the 6 months prior to that to try to kill it before it became law. It passed this Congress by legislative shenanigan. I don't know that it ever enjoyed the support of the will of the American people, of the majority of the American people. But I am determined to repeal it, and I believe that if we're successful in this upcoming election, it will set the stage to do just that. Now, the question that you have is, what is my alternative that will pass both houses? The answer to this is that we don't need to have a Republican alternative that looks like the Obamacare alternative. That 2,700-page bill was put together behind closed doors, jammed together in a closed room, most of it out of the Speaker's office, and some came from the Senate side of it too. This bill was not legitimately debated, but I don't think Republicans should do that. I've long said in our Republican leadership, I believe, agrees with me that we don't bring one big bill that's designed to fix everything all at once. When and if we get the opportunity with the majorities to be able to do this, we need to put the whole list out front that we need to do to reform health care in America, and most of it's to reform health insurance in America. Item number one for me would be to provide for people to purchase insurance across state lines. When this debate began 2.5 or so years ago, there were 1,300 health insurance companies in America and about 100,000 possible health insurance varieties. Well, there are fewer insurance companies today, there are fewer varieties today because of the passage of Obamacare, but there's still a lot of competition out there. And a young man at that time who was paying for a typical policy in New Jersey, say age 23 and healthy, would pay about $6,000 a year for a typical policy. A young man in Kentucky, 23 years old and healthy, would pay about $1,000 a year for a typical policy in Kentucky. I would want to allow the young man from New Jersey to purchase the policy from Kentucky, or vice versa. Bring competition into this. That competition would drive down prices. More people would be insured because they could afford it, and we would have more consumer choice out there across the board. That would be one of the things I would do. Addressing tort reform, which lawsuit abuse, and when you add to that the defensive medicine that takes place in this country, is a number of about 5.5% of the overall health care costs are unnecessarily skimmed off by trial lawyers and then the unnecessary tests that doctors order to protect themselves from being sued, and medical malpractice suits. About $208 billion a year when I calculated that a couple of years ago. We can fix a significant portion of that by addressing the litigation reform or the lawsuit reform. We've done that out of the Judiciary Committee twice since I've been in this Congress, and passed it off the floor of the House at least once, but it didn't get taken up in the Senate, as one can imagine. We have an opportunity to change that. I would put in place also full deductibility of everybody's health insurance premiums and legitimate health care costs, so that everyone who is purchasing health insurance is doing so with before-tax dollars rather than some people are paying for their insurance out of after-tax dollars. It should all be one, or it should all be the other. I say before-tax dollars, tax-deductible health insurance premiums. We could go on down the line, but my ideal transformational change would be to expand health savings accounts so that people would use them to manage their health, manage their lives, watch their weight, get their medical checkups, do their exercise, and if all goes well and they have a good health experience, their health savings account could be transitioned into a pension account, a life management account, if you will. That's some of the ideas that I have out front. but I don't think any of them should be packaged up with any other. I think they should be standalone ideas. We should take the most popular one that's got bipartisan support, and I think that's insurance across state lines, and debate it. Let the American people weigh in, pass it out of the House, send it to the Senate, let them send it to the President. When that becomes law, then take up another one and do the same thing. Work our way down through this list. It'll be, I think, 9 or 10 significant changes. Go as far as we can and still get the support, bipartisan, House and Senate, to the President's desk. That's how things are supposed to be done in this country, and that's the right kind of solutions that we have. So, but in 5 years, you said health care will be unaffordable. I agree. We'll have lost about 5 years in the process of all of this. I see Sarah's got an email that just came in. I'm going to put it on the bottom of the stack because I'm taking them as they come. And I don't know what is here. But this question is from Fred in Storm Lake. And Fred's question is this. After nixing the Keystone XL oil pipeline and China's CNOOC putting up a $15.1 billion bid, how are things working out for President Obama and the Democrats on this whopping blunder? I think I know what Fred thinks. And I would say to you, Fred, that I've known for some time about the significant investment that the Chinese have made in the oil fields up in northern Alberta in the oil sand area. I remember a $3 billion investment, and now they've dumped in a much bigger chunk. It's given them influence with the Canadians. I pushed hard for the Keystone XL pipeline. I'd say Lee Terry, the congressman from Omaha, Nebraska, has been the lead on this and deserves a lot of credit. But in the end, the president has blocked the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. All of the permits, as I understand, are the permits that would be provided by the states. That pretty much is a green light all the way from the Gulf to the Canadian border, with the exception of the agreement that needs to be signed by the United States and Canada to put that section of pipe in right at the border. That's what President Obama has to allow Hillary Clinton to sign off on, and of course he's forbidden that. And so that's that question, that you have, how is it working out? Not very well for the United States. And I had a little insight into this on the night of February 12th. I found myself seated with a couple of members of the Canadian Parliament and their legislative liaison, one or two other people. And I got really late at night. I was waiting for them to bring up the Keystone XL pipeline, and they didn't. And so I asked the question. I said, I imagine Prime Minister Harper is about ready to arrive in China now to negotiate a trade agreement with Canadian oil going to the Chinese. And one of them looked at his watch and to check the date, and he said, well, no, actually, he's back home by now. And I said, well, I hope he doesn't have an agreement. And the answer was, well, yes, he does. I said, I hope it's vague and it isn't binding. And the answer was, no, it's pretty detailed, it's a good agreement, and it is binding. Then I said, it will take, though, quite a long time to build a pipeline through the Cascades and the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Ocean because of the property rights that the Native Canadian Americans have. His answer was, normally that would be true, but that Prime Minister Harper has already negotiated that with the Native Americans. Now, but he said, never fear. He saw the look of disappointment on my face. He said, I want to have access to the Canadian oil. It's North American oil. It doesn't need to be going to China. It should go into the American market. And he said, but don't worry, because if you ever get your pipeline built, you, meaning Americans, will be our preferred customers. And I looked at him and I said, I know what a preferred customer is. That's the one who outbids the other one. That's what I think will happen. I think in the next administration we will go ahead and build the Keystone XL pipeline. I think the Chinese will have first access to that oil and we'll have to bid them out of it. And it's a shame. It didn't need to happen. And but we didn't see either American companies investing in the oil fields in northern Alberta to the extent that I would have liked to have seen. They had their business reasons to do that. I can't tell them how to invest their money, but I'd have been a lot happier if that $15.1 billion were American dollars invested in the Canadian oil fields and some of the previous dollars that were invested as well. So Fred, thanks for your comment and your question. And if anyone has a question or a comment, just email it to askcongressmanking@gmail.com. We've just gotten a couple here, and I'll read the next one. Again, this is a This is live stream. We're taking them as they come. This is from Cynthia. And Cynthia's question is, why is it so hard to enforce the amendment and explanation of church and state? It is my full understanding that this amendment is to protect the church, not the state. I just don't understand why it can't be interpreted correctly. Now, I've dealt with this question a number of different ways, Cynthia, and the separation of church and state doesn't exist in the United States Constitution. It exists within a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptists sometime after the turn into the 19th century. And it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion, nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. So if you look at the condition that's in the amendment, it says Congress shall make no law. That means Congress shall not pass a law that says that there will be an official religion in this country, nor prohibit the free exercise thereof. We'll all worship freely. Congress isn't going to pass laws to say that, for example, in Sweden, the state religion is Lutheranism. And here in the United States, we're not likely to, we will not do anything like that because it violates the Constitution. And so let's see, this amendment is to protect the church, not the state. Well, it's true. I don't know how the freedom of religion in their amendment would protect the state, but it keeps all of the churches so that people can worship freely. And I'd point out, too, that we have a conscience protection that we should have in the things that we do. And when our religious institutions are providing health care services and they're directed to do things within those services that violate their conscience, they have a religious protection that's in the Bill of Rights, and you've just identified it, Cynthia. So I appreciate that, and I hope that answer is clear enough to you. I know we agree, or at least I think we do. And I've got down to where I've got a couple of questions left. And if you have a question, you send it to the email address of askcongressmanking@gmail.com. And Sarah's got another one she's just got that came through. Now, I'm going to just take a little break here and show you something that I brought over here that I wanted to put up on the internet and show you this. This is a piece of the Berlin Wall. And it's one of my most cherished possessions. I keep it in my office here in Washington, D.C. This piece of the Berlin Wall was chopped out of the wall by my banker at the time, who's now retired and a friend, Don Poppin from Odebolt, Iowa. He was going on a trip over to Germany to see if he could find his German roots. And as he was going over there, I asked him, "Are you going to Berlin?" This was 1990, September of 1990. The wall began to come down, the Berlin Wall began to come down on November 9th, 1989. Well, this is a piece that he chopped out of the wall. I asked him, "Would you please bring me back a piece of that wall?" Well, Don Poppin, good friend that he is, rented a hammer and a chisel and chiseled this out of the wall a little ways from the Brandenburg Gate on the east side of the wall. And I've been to that place. There's a little note in the back of this. It happens that he chopped it out on my father's last birthday, which adds just extra value to it. But this piece of the Berlin Wall, it symbolizes for me the single most significant historical event in my lifetime. When the wall came down, it was literally the Iron Curtain that came crashing down in Berlin. And when that happened, freedom echoed across Europe, and some would say all the way across Russia to the Pacific Ocean. Now, it's been pushed back some in Russia, been pushed back in some of the smaller countries in Eastern Europe. But this was the single most significant historical event in my lifetime when the Berlin Wall came down. And I've since walked most of the distance of the Berlin Wall and tried to envision and realize what it was like. But I keep this in my office to remind me how important it was. And I've also stood on the spot where Ronald Reagan gave his speech, his famous speech, when he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Well, here's a piece of the wall that was torn down, in part because of the power of the idea that Ronald Reagan imparted that day outside the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, Germany. So if you come into my office, ask to see this. It's been here every day since I've been in Congress. My piece of the Berlin Wall from 1990. And picking up the next question, this question comes from Utah. And it's from Jamie in Utah, who might be a comment, but here's what it reads. Congressman King, regarding your recent statement about the issue of watching animals fight being a federal crime and watching people fight not being a federal crime is simple. The animals do not have a choice. I am shocked and more than a little disturbed that you would link these two issues or even close to being similar. Please help us understand why you think these two issues are even close to being similar. Jamie, the issue that really took place was a debate in the House Ag Committee on the markup for the Farm Bill plus roughly 3 weeks ago. And when we pass legislation, it needs to have constitutional jurisdiction. There's a reason why there aren't federal laws against murder unless they happen to be a federal agent or someone who has a federal nexus. These activities are reserved for the states to regulate. Now, if it's interstate commerce, if somebody is hauling animals across the state line for the purposes of dogfighting, that's an easier constitutional question. It's far more constitutional than when Congress gets involved in passing federal legislation that would have federal officers, let's say, scouring the countryside looking to see if there's anybody watching an animal fight somewhere. Your local police, your county sheriff, and your highway, your state officials can regulate that and they can enforce it. And the states that have laws against such a thing, I support those laws. But I do not support expanding federal jurisdiction in a place that's of questionable constitutionality. And that's really what the point is. And you know that, as again, the professional hyperventilators are having their day these days. And that's why I'm hearing some of these comments coming through on the internet. So again, this is a live stream video over the internet. This is the second time that we've done this, and if you have a question or a comment, just email it to askcongressmanking@gmail.com. And I've got a couple more questions here to go. If you have any others, they'll send them to me in just a moment. But this is one that came in after we came on the air. And this is from David, and he's in Portland, Oregon. He said, of course, the big question is when you will file your lawsuit to combat the illegal memo-based amnesty attempt by the current administration. Further, I've heard rumors following on Senator Sessions' press conference with senior immigration enforcement officers that ICE will refuse to enforce this memo in any serious fashion. Have you heard this as well? Yes, I have, David, but the first question is, when will I file the lawsuit? And we have discussions going on here in this city. Every day there's something going on. And we brought this thing a lot closer now. We're not ready to make an announcement this week as to the form and the shape of this lawsuit and who the plaintiffs will be. We're very close. And we thought for a while it could be this week. It's possible it could be next week. It's more likely it'll be the following week. But we think before Labor Day, we're confident that we'll have this pulled together. And the issue for the people out there that are watching is this. President Obama, and through the mechanism of the Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, issued an order. And this order was that they were going to exempt certain groups of people from federal immigration law. Now, Article 1 gives Congress the authority to pass the laws. Article 2 requires the executive branch to enforce them. President Obama is the executive branch. He takes an oath to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And he has said as recently as a year ago March, right here in this city, that he didn't have the authority to do what he did. He didn't have the authority to write new law out of thin air. Congress writes the laws. His job is to enforce them, and then it's the judiciary branch's government to interpret them. Well, I agree with that analysis. He was a constitutional adjunct law professor at the University of Chicago. And I agree with that analysis from March 28, 2011 here at the Bell School in Washington, D.C. But the president defied his own analysis when he ordered that they were going to provide this blanket amnesty for 4 different classes of people and ordered U.S. Citizenship Immigration Services to issue a work permit for people that were ordered to be deported by the United States Congress, written into federal law. And so when will we go with this? Pretty soon, within weeks, David, in Portland. And he has heard rumors following Senator Sessions' press conference with senior immigration enforcement officers that ICE will refuse to enforce this memo in any serious fashion. Well, I've talked to the representatives of ICE and the Border Patrol. I don't know that they will refuse. I haven't heard them say specifically that. they take an oath to uphold the Constitution too, and to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And that is what ICE does, and that is what the Border Patrol does. But it's going to be very difficult for them, and puts them in a very difficult position to be essentially ordered to break the law. And the law, and if anyone wants to look it up, David, it's 8 U.S.C. 1225. It orders that people who are picked up and encountered by federal immigration officers be put into removal proceedings if they appear to be in the United States illegally. That's the directive from 8 U.S.C. 1225. And there's an amicus brief on that was filed on Arizona's SB 1070 litigation that went to the Supreme Court. That was written by Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State of Kansas. He makes a strong position case on 8 U.S.C. 1225 that directs that they be put into deportation proceedings. This memo, this order of the President that's written into a memo by Janet Napolitano, does order them to break the law. We'll see what ICE does. They take an oath to uphold it. At the same time, they've been essentially ordered to break it. The President cannot write law from the White House. He could have done that when he was a senator, but he can't do it as a President of the United States, and he can't create a work permit out of thin air, although that's what he's sought to do. And so we're getting down to the end here. AskCongressmanKing@gmail.com is our email address if you have a question or a comment. Now I'm going to hold this last question for just a moment and give you another visual of what goes on in my office here. And this is the Berlin Wall. The Peace of Berlin Wall is one of my most prized possessions, but I would say this Bible is my most prized possession here in this office. And this is the Bible that was presented to my great-uncle, 5 times great-uncle, John Richardson, on the eve of his departure for the war, that is the Civil War. He went off, my family back in that era were abolitionists, and they went off to fight against slavery. And it cost the life of my great-grandfather, 5 times great. John Whiting was his name. But his cousin was John Richardson, and John Richardson survived, as did some of his artifacts. And this is one of them that's now been in the family for a long time. But it was presented to him on the eve of his departure for the war by his sister, and that's noted in this Bible. I don't very often open it because it's such a precious document. But inside, there are verses that are marked up and verses that are noted, and there's an inscription in there from his sister presenting it to him, and there are fly specks on certain pages where you just know it's been laying open by the campfire back in 1863, 1864, 1865. And it says in here that he carried this Bible with him every day, and when he came home 3 years to the day, exactly 3 years to the day from the day he left. This Bible went with him everywhere for 3 years in the Civil War. All the things he must have seen, all he must have lived through, all he must have done, and the commitment to end slavery, the price was paid in the life of my great-grandfather, 5 times great. But this is my most prized possession that I have here in my office. This is a link back in a time in history when people that gave their lives for a principle and using a core of faith and exercising our freedom of religion, I might add as well. This is in the coffee table in my office, and if you come in to visit me, do ask to see it. It'll be laying there and I'll show you. I don't know that there are any other questions coming in, and so this may be the last one. And it is this. In fact, it says, last question. It says, Steve, what can we do if Obama somehow gets reelected? If he gets another 4 more years, you and me won't have any more say in anything. This is written by Justin. Justin, you know, I'm going to avoid making a strong political recommendation here. But I think it's important that people understand the Constitution. They understand the pillars of American exceptionalism. I think you do. What made this country great? We've talked about some of that. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, religion, the press, freedom to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances, the right to keep and bear arms, property rights in the Fifth Amendment, no double jeopardy. You get tried by a jury of your peers, and you can demand a jury trial. The Ninth and Tenth Amendment, which reserve the rights to the states or the people respectively, so that we have a limited federal government. Another pillar of American exceptionalism is free enterprise. We're not a state-run government. We're not a socialist nation. We aren't a nation where we have businesses, private sector businesses that are managed by government. And we are managed by the people who invest capital with an expectation on a return on that investment. And then they hire people to help them make money. And there has to be an expectation of profit before there are going to be any jobs in the private sector. But free enterprise is an essential pillar of American exceptionalism. The rule of law is an essential pillar in American exceptionalism. Some of the things that make this country great are in the Bill of Rights, but I would add to that we're a nation, we're a nation where we have a unique American vigor. We're not like other countries in the world. We didn't just get a random sample from the nations who sent people here legally to become Americans. We got the cream of the crop. We got the vigor of the people from every country that came here because they saw in their imagination the dream, the American dream. They saw wrapped up in the inspiration of the Statue of Liberty all of these pillars of American exceptionalism that I've talked about here, and brought with them the core values of their faith and their families and their work ethic and the vigor of wanting to make a life for themselves and control their own destiny and leave this place a better place for their children than it was for them. All of that is part of this American spirit, and all of that I can see is under assault from people that don't believe the Constitution means what it says, people that don't think families matter, people that don't think life begins at the instant of conception, people that think somehow there's something wrong with free enterprise, which has done more for humanity than any other component out there in the global economy. So this is all at stake. Our constitutional rights are at stake, free enterprise is at stake, the American dream is at stake. And we have something like 98 days and coming to come to a conclusion on which direction this country is going to go, offward and into a more socialist state, or onward and upward into a free enterprise, American vigor, and American dream and destiny state. I think I know which way most Americans will go. I'm confident I know which way most Iowans will go, and I have confidence in the future, and I believe that God will guide our destiny, but it's up to us to do the best we can. I want to thank you all for being connected here tonight on this live stream, and the comments that we get after this program is over also are valuable to us. So if you have any comments that you'd like to send in from having been on this live stream, send us an email on that. We'd appreciate it. I'd like to hear from you as frankly as you can. Each one of these questions and comments I read to you in the fashion that it came to me, in whatever order, just as if you were in a town hall meeting. This is a live stream town hall meeting. It's our second one. I don't expect it'll be the last one, but I thank you for tuning in. Thank you very much.